Hi, Bodhi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, my first question is always I want to pass it back to you. I think nobody can do us more justice than ourselves and telling the audience about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. I can, come at that story many different ways. Yet, what I've been doing predominantly since COVID is working with male leaders across the globe. Typically, my clients are men, early 40s to mid 50s. Normally they're married, mortgage, business, kids. Yeah, they're navigating their hero's journey as a householder. Yeah, they haven't dropped out and they're not surfing 24 hours a day or living in India. Yeah, they're running a business, they're in a leadership role. And my own personal journey is how can I support them to connect with a deeper part of themselves? The way I do that is, there are three pillars, if you like, three legs to the stool for the masculine. And it's presence, purpose, and passion. And that's essentially what I teach men around the globe.
And the second question is always an interesting one for me. I always want to understand my guest's journey. Everyone who comes here has some sort of spiritual leaning, but most of them didn't start out that way. So, what was your early childhood experience with religion or spirituality or nothing at all? And then, how did you come to be grounded in your practices today?
Again, beautiful question. I mean, for me, spirituality essentially is letting go of the illusion of separateness. That's all we're doing, however you want to define it. Yeah. And my journey, so brought up a Catholic, went to a Catholic school, single mum who worked very hard, yet was very keen for me to get a good education and obviously be steeped in the Catholic principles, the Christian principles. And whilst it wasn't extreme, it gave me a sense of community. It gave me a sense of values as a young boy, as a young man, that I think have held me in good stead. Yet, like a lot of people, a lot of Catholics have moved away, I guess, from the religion, inverted commas, from the traditional. I still have a deep connection with Christ, with Francis of Assisi, with Mary. Yeah, I feel their archetypes and their energy are very powerful representations of spirit. And I guess for me, Krista, the real next evolution in my late 20s was meeting Buddhism, coming into Buddhism, as you can see a little bit from the icons, Buddhism, and I have a tradition in Hindu as well. And a lot of that came through yoga. And so I've been practicing yoga for 25 years. And I think those traditions, those teachings, those practices, again, just allowed me to withdraw my senses, that stimulus of the third dimension, and to start connecting deeper with myself, starting to connecting deeper with something else, this field of something that holds us all.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I have some questions here where we're going to unpack more of that because it's really interesting how we get so disconnected from ourselves in the human experience.
Yeah.
So one of the things that obviously your work is really steeped in leadership qualities, and we can think about cultivating leadership qualities across the spectrum. So with our children, with our family, with our friends, in our work. And so my first question, I think, as a baseline for us jumping into the work that you're doing, I really wanted to ask you, number one, what was your journey being developed as a leader, whether you did that on your own and through mentorship, and what came naturally to you and what required like a lot of self mastery on that path?
Wow, great questions. So to me, the simple definition of leadership is influence. We're all influencing. There are formal leaders, there are informal leaders. And so when I work with leaders and organizations, what I know is that in a leadership role, you have a certain level of influence, yet there are also many people in the system that are influencing. And this is before the Instagram influencers got involved. And so essentially, we're influencing our family, we're influencing our business, we're influencing our relationship. So my journey, Krista, is my first 20 years of my career, I was an attorney. Again, single mum. She worked 3 jobs to get me through school. And I did reasonably well. And as a lot of good boys, I asked my mum, what will I do? And she said, go and do law school. And so I went and did law school. Not really having any huge divine calling or purpose. And my wife and I met very young. We've been together over 40 years now. And so she was studying teaching, I was studying law, And in our 20s, we graduated, we had children, and so was very quickly into this householder experience of being a young man, married, mortgage, children, law. My wife was working several jobs. And I guess for me, along that way, I really, not necessarily consciously, but I started to connect with what we know as the hero's journey. And the hero's journey essentially is a map, the work of Joseph Campbell, the work of Carl Jung. What they know in all traditional cultures is that there is a collective archetypal journey, the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And for me, the hero's journey, not having my father left when I was quite young, I was exploring what is it to be a man? What is it to be a father? What is it to be a husband? And my biggest teacher then and till now, Krista, has been my beautiful wife, Amala. Like, she's just called me forth with love all along. She's energetically, it's like, I don't want the little boy anymore. I don't want the wounded little boy anymore. I want the man that you can be. And with that safety and that love, I then started to explore with teachers, with therapy, with workshops, and found some amazing mentors, amazing teachers, both professionally and also in my personal and spiritual development. And that's when I met Buddhism in my late 20s. One of my first teachers, she was a Buddhist practitioner. I really started to dive in with her into the energetic work. So a lot of the work that I've done, a lot of the work I do with men is about presence. Embodied presence is about energy. The most valuable asset we have in life is our attention. And when you
Yeah.
realize that where your attention goes, is the key, and you learn how to bring your attention into presence, into embodied presence, it's a game changer.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's been my journey. How
Yeah.
do I embody this human experience?
I have had a very similar experience, like we talked about before we got into the interview. And I just think it's interesting how when we go on this journey, we have to supplement so much to, come home to ourselves because there is so many tools and education and wisdom and unconsciousness like living in the world, right? So we all have to go and find all these like little secret tools. Funny enough, we end up getting the same ones to help us cultivate, that inner self mastery. So I love that you did that too. And I love that you had a similar path. Buddhism changed me forever, changed really brought me back to who I really was, the core of my being. It's such a sacred thing that I will never be able to understand how the Buddha came up with all these things.
What intrigues me and big part of my teachings, Krista, is because as a young man, so in the hero's journey, we're searching for the Holy Grail. And as young
Yeah.
men, so that the deep driver, if we talk about the masculine and feminine energy, which if we have time we can unpack, the deep driver for the masculine energy, the key driver is freedom. What occurs is as young men, we think freedom lives outside ourselves. We're looking for the Holy Grail. We're climbing the mountaintop. We're going to India. We're going surfing. And there's a point on our journey when we realize the Holy Grail was on the bedside table all along. It's inside of us. And so
Mm.
working with men who have already committed to marriage, to business, to children, it's not about having to leave your job. It's not about having to leave your marriage and go to India to find freedom. It's about how can I cultivate it? But it's freedom from the inside out.
Hmm.
That's the real hero's journey.
Yeah, I have this as a question. I think women have that same thing too. I think
Yep.
women have historically and societally been pressurized to stay in a box trapped all the things.
Yeah.
And I think we're all searching that the underlying thread there is that we want to seek freedom because we are born free, and then we get tethered to things that don't belong to us, and then that that deconstruction and that unraveling is really painful. That was going to be my next question, is for people that are following this prescripted life, and we've all done it. I've done it. I'm divorced now, but I did what I was supposed to do. I did what my
Yeah.
mom told me to do, like yours did. I went to college, I got a good job, I got married, and I at the end of that I just thought, like, this is not who I am. This is not what this is not going to serve my higher calling. I don't really, at that time, I didn't know that's what it was, right? Like I
Mm.
wasn't sure, but I think what's important to think about and asking this question, I want to know from you specifically, how is it that you're helping people find the alignment and the purpose? Because you're telling them you don't have to drop all those things either, right? Some
Yep.
people just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, like, I can't find those things. So, what is that path to help them find the alignment in the prescription if they choose to stay in it?
Well, the key, as you know, and you know, the journey you've been on is very familiar, is that change comes from inspiration or desperation. For a lot of us in our life, we get to the point of what you call, inverted commas, desperation, the marriage, our health, the midlife crisis, whatever it might be. There's a point where we go, this isn't serving me anymore. And so I like to intervene with men who are ready to be inspired because, as you know, the external world inherently is meaningless. So it doesn't matter what's happening externally. It's our internal state, which creates our reality and creates our state of being. And so the real hero's journey as a household is, how can I cultivate my internal state with my marriage? How can I take 100% responsibility for the way I show up, knowing my wife is just mirroring back a part of me I haven't healed, I haven't loved. Yeah, same as my children. They're just mirroring back. This is the pathless path. The workshop is life. Yeah, and consciously or unconsciously, that's our path for a lot of us. We've made the commitment and it's like, okay, here's the workshop. Let's go. We don't need to go to Sedona or Austin, Texas. It's right here in downtown Detroit. Let's do it.
Yes, the world asks us so much to look externally, and it takes us so long, well, maybe some of us discover. I don't want to, generalizations are very hard and dangerous, but like, you know, for a group of us that go on the seeker's path or the aspirant's path, it does take us a while to identify the fact there's nothing outside of us that can fill us with what we already have, to guide us and like to trust in that guidance. I did also want to touch on the masculine and feminine energies in leadership roles, and also thinking about how we integrate both of those. I
Yep.
can speak for myself that um, I have a lot of masculine energy, and because I grew up in a system that wanted me to present predominantly in feminine energy, that was really hard. Part of my journey too was trying to integrate those energies and work with both of them where neither of them get rejected. I'm really curious how you're helping men do that, especially because there's been such a hole in the feminine energy for men in our
Yeah.
culture. So let's kind of like take me wherever you want with that question. I'm really curious.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a great topic, and I've just come back, from London. As you can gather, I'm based in Australia, running workshops there in boardrooms with senior executives about how the masculine and feminine energy is playing out in their organisation. It's a really juicy and confronting conversation, and we know that with the rise of the divine feminine in all of us and on the planet. Yeah, we've also got to support the divine masculine to hold it. Yeah, and we've got to find ways in our structural organizations, business, politics, and everything. How do we integrate this? Yeah, because they're so skewed now to the patriarchy, to the distorted masculine. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
it's a fascinating cutting edge conversation, I think. To wind back a little bit, just to give the listeners, my filter on it. And again, it isn't based on gender, and this isn't necessarily the right way or the only way. This is just the way I've come to the teachings. In all traditional cultures, having sat with Aboriginal Australians, Native Americans, the Hindu culture, what we knew in the universe, and on the planet Earth, is there are these two different currents of energy, which we could call masculine and feminine, yin and yang, Shakti, Shiva. And you could label them anything you want. This is just the traditional cultures kind of identified this polarity, the power of the polarity, the North Pole and the South Pole, and labeled it masculine and feminine. And when they started to identify it, what they realized, what we could call the feminine energy, essentially is everything that flows and everything that moves. Yeah, it's like the ocean and the river. That's the feminine in us. It's constantly moving. And the key driver for the feminine energy in us is connection and love, connection and love, connection and love. Do I feel connected or not? Do I feel connected or not? That's the search. Yeah, constantly. It's the river. Yeah. And it'll be all the spectrums of the ocean. It'll be wild. It'll be calm. It'll be cool. Yeah. This is the beautiful spectrum of our feminine. The divine feminine wants to be it all, wants to reveal it all. The masculine energy is that which presences the feminine. It's like the feminine is the river and the masculine is the riverbanks. We have to have a certain amount of structure and scaffolding in our life to hold the flow. Yeah. And this is for men and women. It's like, how do I integrate that? The masculine energy is about linear. It's about agency. It's about presencing. And the key driver for the masculine is freedom. So we've got this incredible polarity of connection and love from the feminine and freedom from the masculine. And that's the integration. Yeah. Not based on gender in all of us. How can I create enough, masculine, and flow states, which obviously I talk to my clients about, and there's a lot of conversation there. Flow is just presence in action. Again, it's the river and the riverbanks. And so what happens is that in these layers, most people, and this is a big conversation, but most men that I work with are more in their masculine energy. It's a huge generalization. Yeah. But when they're in their masculine energy, like anything, it can be healthy or unhealthy. Same as our feminine energy can be healthy and unhealthy. So what does the healthy masculine look like? What does the healthy feminine look like? And that's a big part of the journey for the men that I work with. It's like, the most attractive thing to the feminine is the ability to be presenced by the masculine. Yeah, just presence me. And if I go into gender, and again, it's not gender specific, but I work with a lot of heteronormal couples. Yeah. And the conversation often is, I just want to be seen. I just want to be present. Mm-hmm. The biggest addiction in the Western world is distraction. The journey from distraction to presence exactly. That's what I teach men. Simple practices. They've come from traditional cultures, but how can I presence? Now, the feminine doesn't want to be present 24 hours a day because it's also attractive if a man's on purpose. So the ability to be present, the ability to be clear on my purpose. And then the thing with passion is it's passion for life. It's passion for my children. It's passion for my career. It's passion for my beloved. A lot of people say, find what brings you joy. What I say is bring joy to what you do. Cultivate it from the inside out.
With the flow and the structure, I think that's spot on. When you have both of those in a balanced way, you feel healthy. Women are very intuitive and can move in directions that they feel and sense are the right direction without knowing it. But if there isn't structure in that can go off the rails. And then if there's too much structure, like you said back there, where you said like the masculine is very pointed and linear, and that's so true. But then it's like you're looking for the tree and you miss the forest kind of thing. Like it's so important for us to be able to see where we are on the spectrum, the polarity. I think it's an interesting question for all of us to unpack within ourselves, and we have so much that comes from our culture, from our families, and like even just our ideas of how we think we should be based on our own gender. It's so interesting.
So just a quick note to the listening audience, Bodhi and I tried to connect first in our first attempt to do an interview, and we had some technical difficulties, so we had to reschedule. Thank you for hanging on. So the format will probably look a little bit different. We are also in a different application today. So we're going to continue on our conversation that was going really well with all of Bodhi's work and pick up where we left off. So my first question back from part 2, essentially, of our interview was, I was really wanting to dive into the leadership work that you're doing, which is really important canon of everything you're, or part of your canon that you're doing. And leadership, I think, has changed so much, as the generations go on, and how people relate to their work, right? And how we identify with our roles in leadership as well. One thing that you talk about, which I think is really interesting, is this idea of leadership and commitment. And you say something that like true freedom is commitment. And that seems really counterintuitive, I think. I wanted to know what you mean by that, and how, even though they seem like commitment seems like the polar opposite of freedom, So what do you mean by that, and how does it relate to leadership?
It is a great question because commitment is often misunderstood. And there is a thing called the commitment paradox. And as you know, the more we dive deeper into self-awareness, leadership awareness, we come into these places of paradox, contradiction. And so the simple way is if you just tune in for yourself around what does commitment feel like for you? If you do that now, and the listeners can do it as well, and maybe come up with some words, Krista, like if you, and even if you feel into your body, you know, when feel into what does commitment feel like? Yeah, what words come up for you when you're committed to something?
The initial word is always like consistency.
Yep, yeah, beautiful. Yeah,
Consistency, stability, I love those kinds of things, really
yep,
make me
yep,
feel my own commitment and someone else's commitment.
yeah. And can you get a sense that you're all in?
Yes.
It's like, yeah, exactly. So working with clients, with leaders, there's an energetic and emotional sense of when I'm committed to something, I'm all in, I'm fully committed. There's the consistency. Yeah, fundamentally, commitment means I choose to have no more choice.
Right.
Yeah, and again, there's a paradox in that. So now, if you just tune in to what's it like when you sit on the fence with something, when you kind of haven't really made the decision, you're half in. What does that feel like to you? What emotions, what words come up for you?
I'm actually a very decisive person by nature. So like if I ever feel any weirdness about being on the fence, like it doesn't take me very long to make a decision. So the ickiness of it, of the ambiguity I don't like. So I'm a very like discerning and and I
Yeah,
just make a quick decision. I really am assured in myself in that way. But I know for other people it's super uncomfortable
yeah,
to maybe be that decisive as well.
yeah, exactly. And that ickiness and ambiguity you talk about is when we haven't committed and we're half in or we're sitting on the fence, it's actually an energetic drag. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy, a lot of emotional energy. Yep.
Absolutely.
And where your attention goes, energy flows. So if you want to be a better leader, if you want to be a better partner, better parent, your energy and your attention, when you're committed, it will accelerate, yep, whatever it is you're trying to experience, as opposed to that half in May, you know, like I often say that you can either resist or you can flow. And so and any of the listeners who may, you know, tune into that for themselves, and just notice where you're not fully committed in your life, where you're still sitting on the fence, and, you know, that's okay. Yep. Just know that when you're fully in, you're going to have a different experience. And how this plays out particularly for men, because, you know, if we take it into relationships, you know, the commitment fear, you know, the old distortion of commitment and the fear for men to fully commit is actually not true, because once you commit, yep, that's where freedom lives. And I'll explain to you where that lives. So the first thing is, yeah, remember, commitment is I choose to have no more choice. It's like the aeroplane on the runway. At some point, it's committed to taking off. Yeah, it's fully in. Yeah. And what happens is when you fully commit to something, the first layer of freedom is you're not entertaining the thoughts and the distraction of, am I in? Am I not in? Should I be here? Should I not be here? You're fully in. So you're freeing up all of that mental energy and emotional energy that becomes a drag. And that in itself is a very enjoyable and uplifting experience, because it's like, I'm all in, I'm committed. And if we apply it to relationship, if we apply it to, you know, certainly for me with my yoga practice, there was a point many years ago where, you know, I used to sit on the fence, you know, and I used to wrestle. And as you know, the hardest thing with yoga is getting to the yoga mat. Do you know what I mean? Because all that mental, you know, and exactly. And any of the listeners who might be wanting to do more mindfulness or anything, yep, you just haven't committed. Once I committed to my yoga, I chose to have no more choice. And one of the best bits of advice one of my yoga teachers gave me, she said, just do one pose a day. Just get to the mat. And once I committed to that, of course, once you do one pose, you kind of go, oh, I might do another pose and another pose. And so this commitment, and where this plays out in relationship, particularly working with a lot of men in heteronormal relationships, is some of them aren't fully in because they think they're losing their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But what it actually means, what you're saying to your beloved is, I absolutely have choice in my life, and I'm 100% choosing to be with you in this moment. Yep, in this day. I'm choosing to be here. I'm 100% here. I'm 100% present. And if you lean into that, knowing that the paradox is, of course, you've got choice. You know what I mean? Like that's where we
Yes.
get tricked up because we
Yeah.
think, oh, if I commit, I'm going to lose my choices or I'm going to be constricted, instead of going, as soon as you commit, you're fully present, you'll start to create an incredible connection with your partner, an incredible
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Does that make sense? Can you feel the
Yeah.
difference?
Well, and I think what you're saying here is like the mental load of the commitment is sometimes what undermines us making the commitment, because it's also the fact that when we think about commitment as a generalization, like a lot of us get stuck in like the enormity of it, right? And being
Yeah.
able to distill down, like, this is just the one choice I'm making. And also like the paradoxical and duality that you're talking there, and all of those things that
Mm.
are underneath all of our decisions, is also about being able to discern later on down the road, like, is this the right path for me? And being able to say, like, I can decide differently at a different time instead of like going all in. It's that
Yeah.
enormity of the commitment that really trips up a
Yeah.
lot of us, right?
Yeah, it's great awareness, it's like, oh my goodness, and what's fascinating is, again, if we think about relationship, I've been married to my wife for 40 years this year,
Mhm.
and there's a point where I commit to you for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
for most people who are married or in a committed relationship, and of course it doesn't mean the fears don't come up, it doesn't mean the stuff doesn't come up, but the
Yes.
real key, and this is the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, is what happens is that if you want to be the best version of yourself, if you want to deal with your stuff, your shadow, as soon as you commit to something, that's going to start to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But what a lot of people do is when they don't deal with their fears, when they don't deal with the stuff for themselves, eventually they question their commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they go, oh, that wasn't the right person. I married the wrong one. And instead of going inward and going,
Right. Yes.
yeah, this is the opportunity. Whatever healing I require, whatever work I need to do on myself is going to be mirrored back,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in committed relationships. That's the gift.
Almost always.
Oh, exactly.
And that is where the work is. And it's funny because a lot of us will have that propensity to want to run instead of addressing it, right? Because that's easier, and it is easier if you are not self-aware, you're not having some sort of contemplative internal practice, you want to
Yep.
put the ownership on the other person or the situation or the circumstances.
Yeah.
That's the greatest, easiest way to get out of it. But all, like you said at the beginning of the interview, like, life is the workshop, the retreat.
Yep.
This is where all the work lies.
Yeah, exactly. And most of us are living the outside in model instead of the inside out
Yes.
model. It's like,
Yeah, 1,000%.
if I just change this partner, yeah, and find another one that's perfect. One of the biggest setups, I think, around relationship is the Disney movies. As much
Oh,
as I love watching the
don't
Disney
even get
movies
me
with my
started on
grandchildren,
that.
yeah, you know what I mean? And I've got, 7 granddaughters and 3 grandsons, but I'm watching The Princess with my granddaughters, and it's beautiful. And of course, at 5 and 6 and 7, yet, I think a lot of people, and as a generalization, think I'm just going to find the right one and we're going to have the beautiful wedding and it's going to be happiness for the rest of my life. And in my experience, and certainly working with lots of clients,
Mm-hmm.
it's the inside out model. Like
Mm-hmm.
you got to be willing to reflect and explore and inquire as to what's going on for you,
Mm-hmm.
to create a juicy, long-term, intimate, committed relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the really important things too, I won't yarn on too much about this, about the Disney movie, but also if we're
And
if we're thinking about just relationships in general too, is just that there's this like overly pressurized idea that, everyone has to be ready at a certain time to be in long-term commitment or a relationship. And
mm,
if we all come to it honestly and from a place of like, I'm not ready yet for that. And like, I'll just speak for myself in my life experience. At one point I realized like I'm not sure that I'm ready for commitment, at a certain point in my life. And going against that norm in our societies is very hard because it tells that external pressurizing
Mm.
is big. But I think there could be so much saved if we were just honest with like, maybe right now is not the right time, you know, even if we're in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, like we all get there at different times, and that's okay too.
Yeah, exactly. And comparison really is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
I know
Or
money is
even
said,
well, yeah,
but
comparison. No, yeah, well, comparison is like the thief of joy, and then money could be, I guess, the root of all evil.
yeah, yeah, that's right. But again, we have these cultural norms.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we compare ourselves against this cultural norm,
Hmm.
or we compare ourselves against the illusion of another couple who seem happy,
Right.
or and as soon as you do that, it's like the whole thing of belonging or fitting in. As soon as we try and fit into a cultural norm,
Hmm.
yeah, we take away our truth.
Oh
We take
gosh.
away,
Yes.
and we take away belonging to ourselves
Hmm.
and connecting with ourselves. And as you say, the truth is that each of us, there's a time when you're ready to commitment. And in some early days in relationship, it's simply saying, I'm committed to exploring
Hmm.
where this goes. That's all.
Yeah, that's literally it. And because
Yeah.
again, like not everybody is the right partner for you. And sometimes you have to go through different relationships until you understand what you want. And that's a journey in and of itself that shouldn't be shamed or judged
Mm,
by any respect.
exactly. And when I work with couples, the other thing, and again, we've been, culturally, we've been sold. You're probably a bit young, but in the US, there was the TV show The Waltons.
No,
Yeah,
actually I'm 43. I did watch the Waltons.
right.
I
Okay.
did.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the Waltons, my download from the Waltons is that, John Boy, there's this happy
Hmm.
family, everybody's happy all the time.
Hmm.
Yep. And
Everyone
everybody
has their
knows them.
place.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And in my experience, and certainly working with clients, is
Oh no.
every relationship is different. Every family of origin is different. But if we come
Hmm.
back to commitment in relationship, when I work with clients, I'm like, you don't have to do it the way you think other people do it, or the
Hmm.
way you think it should be. One of the biggest things in the US is there's so many incredibly powerful and high achieving women, but sometimes it's
Yeah.
like, you know what, I've also got a nurturing side that I want to explore and experience. And
Hmm.
so, you get to collaborate with your partner through the context of commitment. How do we want our relationship to be? How does it
Hmm.
need to look, instead of these stereotypes?
I know. Yeah, they're
And
really damaging.
yeah, well, they're just inauthentic because, life is unique. Relationship is unique. And if you're unwilling to explore that, if you don't feel safe to tell your truth about what your needs are, what your expectations are, then yeah, again, we're just living someone else's life or someone else's
Hmm.
relationship, and it's usually not fulfilling.
No. And then we become fragmented individuals or inauthentic versions of ourselves that
Yeah.
is that be there. And then there begins this like internal turmoil and separation. It's just such a slippery, slippery slope. Well, I really appreciate you saying all of that. I still have a few more questions I want to ask you. I'm mindful of the time here. Also in the
Yeah.
leadership vein, I had a question about cultivating presence and removing distraction and how that allows us to be better self-led, but then also allowing us to lead, how that translates into our leadership roles, whether that be in like retreats or in the corporate world or,
Mm.
running a small business or entrepreneurial things. How important is it for us to be cultivating that presence of mind and removing distraction that we know is always going to sabotage us? Like, what are
Yeah.
you telling
Yeah.
people on a regular basis to sort of anchor them
Exactly.
in? Yeah.
Now, the key to leadership, the two keys to leadership are connection and direction. Yeah. That's what people want. Yeah. So if you're formally a leader, owner of a business in a leadership role, the key that your staff and your team are looking for, having worked with thousands of business globally, the feedback I
Hmm.
get consistently, I just want connection with my line manager, my
Yeah,
supervisor, my
that's a big
leader.
one.
Exactly. And I just want direction. The goalposts seem to move, but nobody tells me. What are your expectations? And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, one is a feminine trait, connection, and the other is a masculine trait, direction.
Right.
Yeah. So just weaving that in. And then
Mm-hmm.
to answer your question, presence, yeah, fundamentally starts with connection of self,
Mm-hmm.
connection with self. Yeah. And so if you are unable to cultivate a deeper connection with yourself, being more present with yourself, yeah, noticing your thoughts, noticing your feelings, noticing your energetic system and your behavior, it's very hard to connect with your team. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so many leaders who are so distracted and so in their head bubble and in their thoughts. 80,000 thoughts a day, most of them are negative. And they're jumping from meeting to meeting to
Yep.
meeting. And there's just this head bubble. Yep. It's like a chopper chop. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, it's like there's no embodiment, there's no presence. And you know yourself, particularly in the feminine's looking for connection. I want to feel the relationship with my leader. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
some head bubble just coming into a meeting and, basically rattling off a whole bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the challenge, as you say, the current program I'm doing with the leadership team is from distraction to presence,
Mm-hmm.
because we're in a world of distraction.
Yeah, big time.
Exactly. And the thing with distraction, so when we meet the external world, there are three primary responses, when we're in our defense. So as leaders, as individuals, one response is I react to the external world. I get triggered. Yeah, I want to blame. And energetically, a lot of leaders launch their energy at the other person. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
do this on time. Why didn't you do this? You didn't close the sale. It's a reaction. The other is distraction.
Mm.
So, and I'll explain it. So we react, we distract, or we repress.
Mm-hmm.
They're the three primary responses. And so distraction is, I want to get out of here. Yep, I'm going to distract myself. Yep, I'm going to distract myself with food, with alcohol, with my phone. Yep, whatever it is, I'm unwilling to be present in this moment. I find a distraction, and I'll come back to that because that's a big one. And repression, is when we just repress and suppress what's going on, particularly our emotions. Yeah. And so any of the listeners, just notice when you meet the world, if you start to get defensive, you'll be in one of these three categories. You'll either be reacting, distracting, or repressing.
Mm-hmm.
And the distraction piece, which is so beautifully encouraged by social media, by our phones. Yep. There are so many ways we can distract ourselves from the present moment. And as a leader, there's some incredible studies. If you get a text message or an email in the middle of doing something, it can take 23 minutes for your brain to refocus.
Yeah.
Yep. And this whole thing of scattered to-do lists, busy, do, is actually the most ineffective way to lead.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I encourage is, are you committed to being present?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the practices I teach, which are very simple, come from traditional wisdom. 5-10 minutes a day, these practices,
Mm-hmm.
and then reminders during the day. You can be present. You'll be amazed how it transforms your leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the deep presence in a leadership role or influencing role wherever you are is just so critical, because there is so much demanded on our time and with people and with projects and just everything that, if you don't do anything, building a deep presence and a self-awareness and a practice and meditation around that could really change the way you interact with the world. I feel like I'm so grateful I went on that journey as well. I do work in my life outside of podcasting. I am in a corporate leadership as well. And I feel like there are days where there are just so many demands on one person, not just me, but like I've got like a global team, and we're just like, there's just so much, and it's very easily to have, a conversation go sideways because you're not paying attention to your tone or you're rushing through something. Like it's just so easy to have things go off the rails in any leadership role or any organization. And that presence is so, so critical. And so when you think about the piece of like cultivating compassion and empathy and emotional intelligence as a leader, like I think those things are really important. So
Mm.
what do you feel about those three things specifically, and how do you view them as really part and parcel of us, our human journey, of not just in a leadership role, but how are you incorporating those things in the work that you do?
Yeah, great question. And as you've mentioned, so for me, leadership is an inside out job as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are three types of aspects to leadership. There's self-leadership, which is the inside out. There's relational leadership. Yeah, how do I relate with individuals, with teams? And there's systemic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Am I aware of the system? Am I aware of the organization or the sporting team? Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
always start with self-leadership. And so compassion and empathy have to start with self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of the biggest things with getting present is, and my invitation to any of the listeners is, if you can cultivate the studies around effective leaders, they got 30 effective leaders to map their behavior for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the most effective leaders, quote unquote, yeah, all had a daily reflective practice,
Mm.
at least once a day. Now, reflection, yeah, it can be contemplation, it can be meditation, it can be yoga, it can be prayer, it can be sitting in nature, it can be sitting in your garden. But what they're doing is they're starting to reflect on how they showed up as a leader. They're starting to reflect on their emotions. They're starting to reflect on how present they were or were not.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing to start to answer your question is, if you want to cultivate compassion and empathy as a leader, you've got to get to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to befriend and spend time with yourself through reflection, through awareness, through presence practices. Yeah, because it's an inside out job. The one
Yeah.
common denominator in all of your relationships is you. And,
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest gifts you can bring the world, is your happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if you
Yeah.
cultivate that, if you cultivate happiness and joy, then it's going to influence your team. It's going to influence your family, your community. One of the things I teach around joy is, a lot of people say, do what brings you joy. But for me, it's about bringing joy to what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that
Through
nuance is
self-awareness.
everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because if a leader, isn't resisting and bringing joy and happiness, and it doesn't mean we don't have tough days. It doesn't mean we don't have
Right.
deadlines.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't have expectations, but it doesn't mean you have to go into, being, into the victim or being in the drama triangle. It's like you can just be present and go, okay, how do we respond?
Yeah. And you
It's
raise such an important point when you come back to this idea of model or coming from inside, because when we're coming from the inside out of leadership, right, we're starting to model that behavior. And if
Yep.
we're leading people and we're being of service to the organizations around us and the people, if we model that behavior, we know that we can't change anything in this world except for ourselves. And then when we do that, it changes the external and is this really beautiful reflection of what's
Yep.
outside. It's like the inverse of what we were saying like earlier about relationships. Like if you get things you want to run away with, but if you do the work and you cultivate that, that's what you actually see in, like the garden of your life, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And that Wayne Dyer quote, change the way you look at things and the things you
Mhm.
look at change. And what's
Exactly.
interesting then, if you think about your energetic vibration, is you then actually start to attract and find evidence for how
Mhm.
valuable you are, for what, for people wanting to be part of your team, for people, going the extra mile, so it really does
Exactly.
have a ripple effect. Yeah.
It does. It's really, really interesting how, like, it's so simple. And everyone who goes along this personal journey or who are invested in being better versions of themselves, which I'm sure everyone that's coming to you is like, we're all invested in trying to make the world a better place from our own vantage point. It's one of the things you hear early on, like, change yourself and you can change the world. And it seems like so simple, but that wisdom is so deep and profound and has the
Mm.
capacity to change so much, that if we all did that, we would create this beautiful heaven on earth in all of our spaces.
Yeah. And circling back, one of the first things I do with my clients is
Mm-hmm.
support them and encourage them and say, are you committed to your daily practice?
Mm.
Yeah. Not sitting on the fence. And it's okay if you're not. Yeah. Because that's the first thing. Often I work with clients, clients usually work with me one-on-one for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, usually, particularly in leadership roles, our thinking mind is so busy, such an overload. Yeah. And it's like this really fast train. If you want to slow down a fast train, you don't jump in front of it. So what I do is we do these practices together, this work together, to start slowing down this train. Yeah, because they're usually not in their body. They're not connected with their intuition. They're not connected with their emotions. And once they start to slow it down, there's a point for a lot of my clients, where they commit to it. And where that point happens often, Krista, is because anyone would know, when you start developing your daily practice, it can be quite subtle. It's not like, some people think, some people do meditation 3 times and go, it's not for me, it didn't work. Do you know what I mean? Or,
Yeah.
or we have these peak experiences. We go into nature or where we have this peak experience and think every time I'm going to sit down and meditate, it's going to be the same.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in my experience, it isn't. So that subtlety isn't always captured. Yet what happens is, once you cultivate a practice, the feedback I consistently get from my clients is, I missed a day or two and I just noticed how different I was. So it's more the absence of your practice when you realize the benefit.
Yeah.
Than the subtlety of you. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. Yeah, that's a
Mm.
great, beautiful point. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think you're right, because there's also just like, again, with, I think in our culture of, again, wanting to sort of fantasize these experiences, and I've learned on my journey that there is just so much beauty in the simpleness and just the serenity of the normality of our lives, that there's just all this great wisdom that we can draw from. And people just think like, oh, it's going to be, I'm like, they want to do this big intense thing where, like they climb the Himalaya mountains or whatever, and like have that experience. But it's like the work is here in this moment with the people around you. And this is where our spiritual rubber hits the road. And there's so much deep wisdom and so much, I think, beauty in it as well, even if it's hard, right?
Yeah. Well, the path, as I mentioned, is, previously, is life is the workshop. Yeah. Every day, life is presenting you with an opportunity to resist life or move towards life. Yeah. And for the listeners, whatever block you feel is happening in your life around money, relationship, career, whatever fears are coming up, the block isn't in the way. The block is the way. This is the way to true freedom. This is the way to inner peace. This is the way to deep, intimate relationships. And it's, I often say, just 4% a day, 4% a day. You don't have to go and do a weekend and
oh my gosh,
transform everything, just, to your point, the simplicity of just 4% a day. In flow states, I work a lot with flow states. And in flow states, what they say is that, just 4% a day. If you can lean in and cultivate 4% more awareness, 4% more presence, then you'll slowly get there. And traditional cultures knew this. Traditional cultures knew you have to have a daily reflective practice, whatever it is for our listeners, and you've got to be reflective. One of the things, and I think Joe Dispenza puts it so well, he says the fastest way to train your mind is to train your body. And what he says is, if you can just find a place in your house each day to sit for 10 minutes with no distractions, like training a dog, just sit. You don't have to even do any particular practice meditation. And in my experience, what happens is, when you do that, your mind's going to start screaming. It's going to start.
It does.
It's going to go, I can't do this. I'm too busy. I've got to get the phone. What about this? What about that? But what happens is, what he's saying is, that's a really fast, not a fast way necessarily, but a really powerful way to start slowing this mind. Because traditional cultures knew we have to withdraw the senses. We have to go inward.
And just to give them a break too, like a literal, tangible, physical, mental, spiritual break. Like I always just think about so I don't like to do spoken meditations. I really enjoy silent meditation for just the sole fact of just allowing my brain to just be quiet, because even when I go to sleep, I'm dreaming. So I know my brain is working, and it might be, at a different capacity and only a certain percentage, but allowing myself to just like give my brain respite and silence, I feel like is everything.
And, some of the studies around mind wandering, and things like that. And yeah, again, to reiterate for the listeners, particularly, the masculine and feminine is slightly different. So the feminine finds stillness often through a movement, through dance in traditional cultures. You watch the feminine will dance, but will find stillness in the dance because the feminine is everything that flows, everything that moves. And the masculine is that which presences the feminine. So the masculine in us, will find more presence through stillness. And so there's no right way. Each traditional culture, there's many roads to coming back home. And so I encourage the listeners, try a few different things, listen to different things, try different yoga teachers. As you say, silence works for you. For some people, an audio might work. Yet, the one thing is just that relationship with yourself. Just to find 10 minutes a day to be with yourself without distractions. It is a game changer.
Yeah, and just finding what works for you, because there is also very much a big judgment thing about like, this is the right way that you should do that. And I feel like anyone who ever hears that should just like run for the hills. We have to part of getting to know ourselves is getting to know what we need, and that's part of this practice as well. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true. And part of the journey and the joy is exploring that. Exploring all that, but being honest with yourself, not being a spiritual seeker who's distracting themselves with every new workshop. Which we've all done, haven't we?
Yes, that's like that's like the first couple of years, like everyone goes through that, the spiritual materialism that sort of hits you and you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I did want to just also circle back to one thing you said that I think is always interesting as well, in the dynamic of creating our own suffering, right? So back there, you were also, you didn't outwardly say it, but it's also like not creating our own suffering and empowering ourselves, from a different perspective to choose differently. And I think like for me, I am a practicing Buddhist. When I realized that, like the teachings of the Buddha around suffering. And then also when I really had an honest look at myself about how was I creating my own suffering in relationships, in the resistance that you talk about, like all of these places that create this like just ickiness of suffering, like whether it's even if it's little or it's big. And then like being able to just honestly have that conversation with yourself about like where can I remove my own suffering? Like, where am I falling victim to myself, my circumstances, or my ideas about things? And how do I break out of that? So I kind of wanted to circle back with you on that, just to see if you have anything else to say about that before we wrap up.
Yeah. Beautiful question. So there's a difference between pain and suffering.
Yes.
Yeah. And usually the suffering comes from resistance, comes from aversion, and comes from attachment. When we look at the world each day, there's only two things you're ever going to see: the way you want it to be or the way you think it should be.
Yeah.
And as soon as you go into the should, you're in suffering. You're in resistance, you're in control. And so that should is a judgment that the world should be different. I want more of this or less of that. That person should be different. All of that creates suffering. And in my podcast, which I launched last year, called True Freedom, true freedom, the key parts to freedom from the inside out. And again, this is the hero's journey. The first is to let go of the suffering, to let go of the attachment, to let go of that aversion. Because it's simply a construct. It's through our mental interpretation that we impose it. The Buddha teaching. It's like all of that. And the second is that freedom, when you really get present with yourself, and anyone who's had children, when you see a newborn child, the innocence and the love, our true nature is free. We are free. And I know there's listeners there who have difficult circumstances, and, like I'm not making light of the challenges that we face. But at some level, there's a place in us. I get the Buddha nature. If you're practicing it, the Buddha nature is absolutely free.
Yeah, that's real.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the inward journey. That's the hero's journey. The hero went looking outside himself for freedom. until he realized it was inside himself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say too much anymore because again, we're getting towards the end, but like there's so many ways in which we self imprison ourselves with ideas and the shoulds, and like we talked about earlier, the stereotypes and the pressure from society, all these ways, and we think we're not free, like to your point, and we there is such a deep resonance of freedom and flow that lives inside of all of us, and it's just so beautiful. But I'll leave it there
Yeah.
because we're at the end here, but I did want to give you some space to tell everybody what programs you have coming up, anything that you're offering at this time. I'm not sure what you've got going on your side, but I'll give you some space to do that now.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, it feels like there's so much so much more we could talk about. So, you know, to the listeners, that we're offering a free complimentary mini course called Freedom and Flow. And that's on the website, www.bodhialdridge.com. And also what I'm offering in that is, and particularly any of the men who are listening, I'm offering a complimentary 1-hour coaching session alignment call. So if you feel called to this work, if you feel you want to go a little bit deeper, then, you know, please reach out. I'm happy to have a call with you, support you, go deeper with some of these concepts and principles and help you, find true freedom.
Beautiful. And I always end the podcast in gratitude. So I always want to ask my guests, what 3 things are they grateful for in this moment, this week? Anything that is rattling around in your heart chakra?
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for my beautiful wife, the most amazing goddess, who is just such a sparkle. We've just had all the family for Christmas and it's been such a delight. I feel I'm grateful for my commitment to this journey. You know, and that started in my late 30s. Like I danced around like a lot of us, and in my late 30s, I really committed to this. You know, and you know that I'm 61 now, you know, so it's been quite a journey. But that commitment, I chose to have no more choice about remembering who I really am. Yeah. And I'm also grateful for all my teachers. Yeah, so many beautiful guides and mentors. And what I say to men is, you know, the 3 most important men in your life are you, your closest friend, and your mentor. And if you haven't got a mentor, find a mentor. It can be an elder, community member, a sports coach, a therapist. Yeah, that's how men learn.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for making it through all the technical difficulties, the schedule changes, the platform changes. You've been such a delight to work with, and I really appreciate you coming on here and doing this interview with me. I'm sure it'll touch my listening and viewing audience. And I'm so thankful, Bodhi. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Krista. And yeah, love to everybody.